While the public is getting in the seat, I would like to remind one important ROE. Please check your watches and phones so that we will not be disturbed by any ringing. For the round tables, there might be some questions. Please ask them through the YouTube feed or through the Twitter hashtag EI2AirspacePower. For the people in the room, you can also use the phone numbers and text your questions to these numbers. Okay, while the public finishes to arrive, I'm gonna talk about this afternoon. So to start this last afternoon of the conference, we have the honor, and I wait my words, of welcoming Brigadier General Professor Frans Osinga from the Netherlands, who is one of the world leading reference on air power and on defense and security. He has kindly accepted to present to us a keynote on what he characterizes as a conundrum. I could highlight this conundrum, but I trust Professor Osinga to explain it in clearer words. Sir, as your title suggests, and your many publication support, you are both an accomplished warrior and an accomplished scholar, which allows you to excel in theoretical as well as on pragmatic approach, two qualities that for me underpin your clear views, particularly when it comes to culture. Culture which is central to the gist of this conference. I could go on and on your resume, but I know that our audience will rather hear you than me. So without further ado, Air Commodore Frans Osinga, the mic is yours.
Thank you for this very kind and flattering introduction. It is a great pleasure and an honor to participate in this wonderful conference, a very important conference indeed. It's been, I believe, 13 or 12 years ago that I last spoke in a similar conference, and this was at the Defense College in the heart of Paris. And the disconcerting thing is that the argument I'm going to make today seems a bit similar to the one I made in 2008, 2009. The challenges we face as European air forces haven't gone away indeed. I think they've only become more urgent to be solved. I would like to try and start sharing a presentation with you and see if that works. It worked this morning, so let's see if this works today as well. Hang on, bear with me for a second. We should be able to share something here. If it worked this morning, well, could you please give me a heads up if you can actually see this or not? Apparently not.
We don't see. You have a right to share.
Yes, but what I want to share is not on. So I think you can see this, can't you?
That's okay for us.
All right. There we go. The title of our presentation today, I've got for your entertainment and distraction, of what I'm actually going to say, included a number of slides. The title is, I think, self-explanatory: Security in the Regnum and the Paradox of European Air Power. Let me take you through this. It is both a positive but also a bit of a warning signal that comes out of this presentation. And before I start out, there's this obligatory disclaimer that I need to lay out here. I'm not speaking on behalf of my Minister of Defense. She is a very intelligent lady. I am not. I'm not representing official policy nor doctrine whatsoever. I'm talking to you from the Ivory Tower. I work at the Defense Academy currently, where I'm the chair of the War Studies Department, and I'm also a special chair in Leiden University on War Studies. So this is an academic critical perspective on where we've come from in the past 30 years and the challenges we're facing these days. When we talk about the future, people harp on the fact that the future is uncertain. And to a certain extent, I do agree with them. On the other hand, I think uncertainty is slightly exaggerated and overrated. Because if we look at the number of sources that are out there, the studies, analysis that are out there in the open source world, I think we have sufficient information to give us a proper perspective on the sort of futures we need to be worried about and the futures that our defense policies and our militaries should be prepared for. There isn't just one future. The future is plural, as Frank Hoffman said in various presentations he gave over the past year. But indeed, all those future visions are somewhat pessimistic. We have left the strategic pause well behind of the 90s, and ever since the 2001 period, the 9/11 attacks, we know that international security is actually deteriorating on a variety of fronts. And as the Munich Security Report of 2019 stated, we live now in a time of the interregnum. It is a phase of prolonged instability and uncertainty where we don't know exactly what the international security environment will look like. But what we do know from history is that phases like this tend to be volatile and quite frequently indeed. We see that these periods of power shifts include confrontations, including military confrontations. So this is not quite an optimistic era that we're in, and it is not a very forgiving era either. This is also the reason why, for instance, the European Union has labeled the current time frame as one of existential crisis, and NATO now recognizes 360 degrees of security challenges around us. Well, this gives us something to work on as air power analysts and theorists. The thing is that while we have been focusing pretty much on technology, and over the past 2 days we have been talking about technology quite a bit, which is quite excellent, I must say. We also know that over the past 30 years, the most radical changes were not of a technological nature, but were geopolitical of nature. That helps us. The past is more useful than we think. Over the past 30 years, we have gained quite a bit of experience in a variety of missions with air power, and that will help us thinking about the future. And I think we know the relevant contours of our future, but that is no reason for optimism. Over the past 30 years, we have consistently produced future visions that, looking back, were actually quite right and quite on the mark. We tended to ignore those insights because we were living as what we thought was the strategic pause. It didn't affect our own national security that much. These days, we know there is no lack of potential smart opponents, and the most disconcerting fact of all is that right now, in the vicinity of Europe, we see that war and old ghosts are back in and around Europe. And I'm talking about the emergence of extremism around Europe, and indeed the re-emergence of nationalism, and indeed in some countries of neo-fascism in certain circles in society. The thing is, for our air power community, it has a potential to make us, actually boost the relevance of our instrument. The security in the interregnum puts a premium on Western air power. Indeed, as we'll show you later on this presentation, it has become the defining and normative feature of the Western way of war in the postmodern era. The utility of air power has greatly increased for joint commanders and for our political leaders. Indeed, it has become the iconic image of Western power. It has the leading edge now. And it has proven to be a very influential and effective deterrent and coercive tool. And now it has also shown to be of very much worth in irregular warfare. It has a reduced footprint whenever we want to conduct interventions. It decreases the risk for our ground troops, and it can dominate and shape the opponent's maneuver capabilities and options. The problem for European air forces is that we are confronted with a paradox. Despite the fact that air power has gained in importance and effectiveness, we have disinvested heavily in air power capabilities across the past 3 decades, despite our best efforts in a European context to boost our capabilities. But if we look at the current capability shortfalls, whether it is in NATO or the EU, most of these shortfalls relate to air power capabilities. So on the one hand, the Western way of war is dependent on this umbrella of precision-age air power. On the other hand, our addiction on air power cannot rely on European air forces alone. Indeed, we have become addicted to US air power contributions. Until 2014, that was not really much of a problem because it didn't revolve around our national security political interest that much. But post-2014, we have become aware that the air power gap now really is a security political problem for ourselves, whether it's the EU or NATO. So let me expand a bit on this bottom line up front slide. What we've seen after 1990 is that across a whole range of operations, air power has proved its worth. Indeed, without air power, all these interventions, whether it was interstate or intrastate, could not have happened with the reduced level of risk that we have demonstrated during those operations. And here you see Desert Storm, Deny Flight, Deliberate Force, Allied Force, Enduring Freedom, all the way up to Unified Protector, and I would argue later on also Operation Inherent Resolve, the fight against ISIS. Underlying those successes, those military successes, I'm not talking about the political successes, I'm talking about the military successes, is this revolution in military affairs that was informed by new technologies, precision weapons, standoff weapons, stealth capabilities, data links, new reconnaissance platforms, which has allowed us to develop a new mode of warfare that crucially depends on air superiority, if not air dominance, and the ability to locate targets precisely and, if necessary, to engage them with precision weapons. After Desert Storm, we applied those capabilities during a very complex humanitarian intervention in the Balkan. We protected blue helmet peacekeepers that were very lightly armed, and without precision-age air power, we could not protect them, and we could not protect humanitarian interests that the United Nations asked of NATO troops. It was a very complex environment, and the rules of engagement and the dual key arrangement with the UN did not facilitate the effective employment of our air assets. Nevertheless, during the Operation Deliberate Force, we managed to bring the warring factions to the table. So here we see, in the middle of the 90s, the employment of air power as a coercive tool. This was repeated 3 years later during Operation Allied Force. Again, the diplomatic, the political environment was not very conducive for the effective employment of air power capabilities. We were confronted with very restrictive rules of engagement. Nevertheless, after 78 days, we managed to force Milosevic to the negotiation table. A lot of critique has been launched against the way that NATO deployed air power, but the fact that air power was the only instrument available and was the prime catalyst that put into motion other diplomatic processes demonstrated that without air power we could not actually pull off such an operation. There was no political appetite for deploying ground forces in such a complex and high-risk environment. Christopher Kocher has written a wonderful little book. It's called Humane Warfare. he acknowledged that in the 90s, the West had developed a new mode of operation where we put the human being center stage again. His argument is that the West has developed a mode of warfare that revolves around humanitarian interest. The deployment of kinetic force, lethal force, could only be legitimized for our politicians if it revolved around the humanitarian interest of ethnic groups, minorities, children, and women. And it could only be legitimized if we could prove we would only target legal combatants. And we would do our utmost to avoid collateral damage and civilian casualties. Indeed, we would only do our utmost to avoid our own casualties. And for him, this was a humanizing movement in the Western way of war. It was a uniquely Western phenomenon. And the other side of the coin was, of course, that now that we had set the bar so high of what we could accomplish with air power, it also became the public and the political expectation. So here we see that this demonstration of Western air power became the iconic manifestation of the Western use of military force. It became the expectation and the cultural manifestation of war in the West. A very positive development. After 9/11, which demonstrated that we were not secure after all, the demands of air power only increased. These are some quotes of the EU security strategy of 2003, where it recognized that our security depended on our ability to help failing states and turn them into robust states again that could clamp down on the security problems in their area. So this explains why over the past 25 years we have operated in what has been called the arc of instability, which I have encircled here in red. The EU said, listen, if we want to be secure, we need to develop a culture that fosters early, rapid, and when necessary, robust intervention. We want to be surrounded by a ring of well-governed countries. Therefore, we want to help the failing states. Because the failing states are the sources of humanitarian suffering, refugee flows. It provides sanctuary for terrorists and guerrilla movements. It provides sanctuaries for organized crime that can smuggle weapons and people. And in the end, the humanitarian refugee flows, terrorists and organized crime will, in the end, also hit our own borders. So this explains why we have become quite interventionist, whether it is through coalition operations, EU operations, or NATO-led operations. The interesting thing is, until 9/11 and the operation in Afghanistan, the dominant mode of thinking was that in irregular warfare, high technology like air power wouldn't do you that much good because we didn't have the ability to find small groups of terrorists or guerrilla fighters. And if we could find them, we didn't have the capabilities to track them and engage them with precision capabilities. Following Operation Enduring Freedom, of which you see a picture here, we now know that without air power, without precision weapons, without precision sensors, we cannot be effective in counterinsurgency operations. And indeed, here you see a quote by Major General Robert Scales of the US Army, who acknowledged after Operation Enduring Freedom that we have developed a new synthesis of air-land integration. Here is a quote: "What is dramatically different these days is rather than airstrikes supporting the efforts of a sizable maneuver force, it is ground forces that are supporting the air operations maneuver force by revealing the location of enemy and forcing it into the open. We have developed what has been called the Afghan model, a very effective cooperation between special forces on the ground and air power on top. And the special forces on the ground act as the eyes and the ears of air power. And during Operation ISAF in Afghanistan, we demonstrated what air power in a supporting role can do for any intervention in such a barren environment without all that much infrastructure. So here you see a list of types of mission that has been crucial for land forces. Indeed, in the end, many ground commanders refused to go on patrol because of the high risk of running into an ambush without the certainty that they would be protected by close air support and air sensors on top. General Barnard the one who was the first commander, the Army commander of Operation ISAF, following Operation Enduring Freedom, recognized that this umbrella of air power allowed him, with a rather minimal force of 12 to 18,000 troops, to have a very substantial influence across the Afghan theater, because he could spread out his forces and they would be protected by air power. This was not a limited operation. Here you see the numbers of airstrikes between 2009 to 2013. We tend to forget, we tend to downplay the role of air power, but this has been a massive operation that lasted approximately 20 years. And we should not downplay the level of effort our air forces have actually put in this operation. The interesting thing is, if you go into bookstores, you will find stacks of books written by ground commanders of what they have experienced in their land operations. There are only a very, very few books about the air side of ISAF. And I think as an air community, we have some homework to do, because this also makes our life not easy if we want to explain what air power has actually contributed to ISAF. Well, fast forward in 2011, again, it was air power that was the only viable and politically accepted instrument, along with a maritime blockade, to force Libyan troops to stop their humanitarian massacre, actually, against Libyan civilians. And here you see an image that the Libyan rebels put on a highway. They thanked NATO. UN Security Council Resolution 1743, I believe it was, did not sanction the insertion of ground troops. So NATO and the 14 NATO nations that participated in these operations were forced to rely on air power to support the rebels and our special forces on the ground there. And in the end, we managed, after a long campaign of about 6 months, to stop the violence against civilians. And indeed, this resulted in the regime change of Gaddafi. In 2014, all the way up to 2017-18, we deployed the Afghan model, i.e. proxy war, where we supported special forces that supported Iraqi ground troops, and we supported those with an umbrella of sensors, air command and control facilities, and air support platforms. And this proxy warfare model, with very limited coalition troops on the ground, managed to evict ISIS troops from Iraqi cities. And this way we liberated Iraqi cities, and now there's an Iraqi flag waving over the Iraqi cities. So again, the use of air power against small bands of terrorists and guerrilla fighters. So, this is the positive news. During the 90s, we demonstrated enhanced capabilities to destroy conventional forces and coerce political elites. After 9/11, we demonstrated this new enhanced utility of air power in irregular warfare and during stabilization and counter-terrorist operations, and indeed also for the responsibility to protect operations in Libya. It has had great advantages for Western land forces. It reduces their footprint. It decreases their risks. It is effective in urban operations. We have demonstrated we can actually target effectively tanks and artillery. We can allow them to swarm and control large areas which in former days they could not. And in doing so, they, along with air power, can dominate and shape an opponent's maneuver. And we can deny sanctuary and offer great situational awareness for ground troops. After 9/11, we have demonstrated this proxy warfare model that allows our politicians these days to exert influence, if they want to, with a limited exploitation of our own ground troops in the theater. And we can protect them and give them information and support, air support, with this leading edge of Western air power. So in the last few days, we've all become aware of the financial cost of air power. But from a political perspective, as John Olson said also yesterday, air power is very cheap indeed. Now, air is often the support element and the key enabler of operation, and it is the first responder, and increasingly it is the only kinetic option politically acceptable. Now, the paradoxical side. So I'm halfway through my presentation, and the next 15 minutes I will focus on the challenges that we're facing. Air power is in good shape, but European air forces are, I'm afraid, not really so. Joint warfare advances have, on the one hand, been predominantly due to US innovations, and we in Europe have not managed in the air power community to get that message across to our Army and our Navy brethren, nor to our politicians that successfully. And if we now look at the capability gaps, whether it is in the EU context or in the NATO context, they are by and large an air power gap. The operations of the past 30 years would suggest we would have embraced real innovation and transformed our joint militaries and make room for extra additional investment in new air power capabilities. That has, however, not happened, and I will explain later on why that is. So the track record of the dynamic stagnations is not entirely promising when we look at the innovation dynamics within the EU. And several reports over the past 20 years have suggested that without US support, Europe is unlikely to conduct a small joint operation, air heavy, without the US. A French report indeed reported that after Operation Allied Force in 1999, that without the US, if only US air assets had operated over there, we would probably have lost 24 aircraft over Kosovo. And this suggests that from a military perspective, there's an over-dependency on US capabilities, and that has become a political liability. And I'm fully supportive of this initiative that started with President Macron to actually achieve strategic autonomy. I think it is a necessity, but I also acknowledge there's a massive challenge. Now let's look into that. But if we look at the US contribution to operations from Kosovo to Libya, here we see that the US has provided 60% of the sorties, 80% of weapons, 80% of standoff weapons, 70% of support missions, 90% of EW and SEAD missions, all stealth capabilities. Well, you can see that. Right. The US has developed this new mode of warfare where they prefer to conduct war from a standoff range with precision weapons, with all-seeing sensors. It has been labeled network-centric warfare. I don't care too much about those labels, but the US has very consciously developed a new mode of warfare, and all those capabilities play a central role in that. We can plug into that, but we still rely on all the key enablers that the US provides. This is not novel. Following 1999, both the EU and NATO have acknowledged these capability gaps, as you can see here. And every year we launch new initiatives to solve these capability gaps, whether it is strategic air and sea lift, whether it's air-to-air refueling, air command and control, increasing the SEAD capabilities or precision munition capabilities. There is a consistent line of innovation efforts, which is good. However, the reality confronts us with a somewhat sobering perspective. As Jamie Shear said in 2014, looking at the operation in Libya, he said, listen, operations in Libya as well as ISAF have consistently pointed to capability gaps and shortfalls in areas such as precision-guided munitions, intelligence surveillance and reconnaissance, counter-fire capabilities, and air transport. And these have been around for a long time. We have not managed yet to solve these capability gaps, despite all these pills that I showed you, the medication in the form of all sorts of initiatives to solve, to cooperate more closely in terms of capability development and acquisition. A recent article by Hugo Meyer stated, one of the problems in Europe is the strategic cacophony. We don't have one perspective on what the priorities are when we look at the international security environment. The Eastern European countries focus on Russia. Southern European countries focus on Northern Africa. Northern European countries focus on the Arctic. There's differences between major countries and smaller countries. Germany, France, and England and Italy don't have the same perspective nor the same set of priorities. That is no criticism. This is very explainable from a national perspective. On top of that, we have different national industrial interests. This is not novel. I'm not saying anything new here. And over the past 30 years, we experienced in the militaries, and in particular in the air environment, a zero-sum innovation climate. We saw budget reductions and expensive, ongoing land-centric operations. In my country, in 2007, we had to postpone or just cancel 1.2 billion worth of investment, including drones and including cruise missiles, for instance, just to pay for ongoing operations and indeed also to reduce our budget. We've seen land-heavy peace operations, for instance in ISAF, and we've encountered inter-service rivalry, which is very understandable in such an innovation climate. The impression in those days was that there's a very low risk of high-intensity warfare, and there was this illusion that in Europe we would be secure, which was understandable until 2014. And we recognize now, in hindsight, that most of our innovation processes and defense planning processes, whether it's the EU or in NATO, they tend to be dominated by army officers, very qualified army officers. But if you look at, for instance, the Helsinki headline goals of 1999 that the EU promulgated, it said we need an army corps with appropriate air and naval elements. Within defense planning community, the army elements still dominate the frame of references. Finally, high-end air power capabilities exceed often national budgets and requirements. My country not necessarily is interested in nationally acquiring SEAD or EW capabilities or more air-to-air refueling capabilities. Our budget nor our ambitions make that a necessity. And a similar holds good for many smaller countries in Europe. So this drives towards the need for more international cooperation. But so far it has proven very difficult actually to pull it off effectively. Until 2014, this was a political liability. After 2014, with this new Cold War, as Medvedev called it a couple of years ago, we now recognize this sustained capability deficiency actually hurts our own security political interest within the European continent. We now recognize that there are A2AT bubbles, and here you see several reports. General Gorange, a former AirCom commander in NATO, recognized that air superiority no longer is a given in certain parts of Europe, for instance in the A2AT bubble around Kaliningrad, where, so the analysts say, if Russia switches on its surface-to-air missiles, a third of Polish airspace is inaccessible for NATO aircraft. That also means it becomes very challenging to reinforce and protect the Baltic states and the Polish border. This explains why a recent Rand report stated, as currently posted, NATO cannot successfully defend the territory of its most exposed members. This should be a cause of worry. We now recognize that Russia has modernized its forces very specifically in very specific areas, for instance, surface-to-air missiles, surface-to-surface missiles, cyber, electronic warfare, and nuclear capabilities. Precisely capabilities that blunt the air power advantage that we used to enjoy. So reinforcement, as several open source documents now state, is very challenging indeed if we look at the Polish or the entire Eastern European region. For military reasons, but also for political reasons. NATO is currently trying to revamp and rediscover what it takes to have a very rapid decision-making process. We are readdressing the logistics to get troops very quickly to the Eastern European border of our continent. If we look at the more military aspects of our deterrence challenges, we now know that theater ballistic missile is a problem, our ground-based air defense assets are scarce, and regaining air superiority is a problem as long as we don't have fifth-generation aircraft. Power projection becomes problematic, and this all translates into the challenges concerning the credibility of NATO's conventional and nuclear deterrence posture. On the horizon, I'm coming to the end of my presentation. On the horizon, we see new technologies popping up. that also demand our attention. So on the one hand, we need to close the capability gaps. On the other hand, we need to free up some budget and look into these new capabilities: robotic, artificial intelligence, hypersonic weapons, unmanned armed vehicles, including autonomous weapon systems. We need to invest and regain expertise in high-intensity warfare, for instance, in multi-domain battle. And during the conference, that topic has been discussed yesterday. So the challenges of yesterday are still there, but the challenges of tomorrow are popping up on top of that. That's why in a number of recent articles, open source articles, you encounter these somewhat sobering, if not pessimistic, warnings. For instance, Armée, who argues in a very long article that strategic autonomy might indeed be an illusion for various reasons. The problem is not that we can't afford it. It will cost us about 100 billion to 300 billion spread out over a number of years. We should be able to come up with the money as a collective in Europe. But the reasons I gave you previously why international cooperation has been a challenge over the past 20 years will still be dominant over the next decade. So he is rather pessimistic about our ability to become more strategically autonomous. Doesn't mean we shouldn't try, but we have to be realistic. And this, in the air power community, this should alert us to the challenges ahead. So let me conclude here and recap the argument I tried to make for you. A bit of a sobering argument. Europe's security concerns put an emphasis on expeditionary and power projection capabilities. These are precisely some of the key attributes of air power. Air power has become the defining and normative feature of Western way of war in the postmodern era. Its tactical operation level and strategic utility for the joint commander and our political leadership has greatly increased. It has become the Western leading edge and a very effective and important deterrent and coercive tool. And for our land forces, it has reduced its footprint and decreases the risk of their operations. It can dominate and shape opponent maneuver, and increasingly, when we talk about counterinsurgency, counter-terrorist, and urban operations, air power can play a very important role. However, there is the paradox. We have been in denial, or simply we haven't recognized our air power addiction. We keep investing in disinvesting in air power capabilities. We now only have about 1,000 frontline fighters, which means at any one moment, we only have 300 aircraft in the air that can man air defense gaps that are there for close air support, air interdiction, and deep strike and offensive counter-air. And my guess is those numbers are simply insufficient if we look at the demands of the operations we have been conducted over the past 30 years. So Europe is still critically dependent on US air power capabilities, and that used to be merely a political liability. Putinism, A2AD, and the rise of China, with the US increasingly looking towards China and the Pacific, this turns it into a major European security issue. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not sure I can turn this into a very optimistic message to the air power community. Perhaps I'm a bit too pessimistic, but at least it gives us food for thought. I thank you for this opportunity to talk to you, and I compliment you for this excellent conference. And I'm open to questions if there is time.
Well, thank you very much, sir. Unfortunately, there is no time for questions, but I hope this conference and your presentations will have contributed to moving towards a more optimistic view. And I hope that some of the questions you raised might be addressed later on at our latest panel, just before the conclusion of this event. So, sir, thank you once again for your contribution and your much appreciated insight.
Excellent. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
So it is now time to move to our seventh and former to last roundtable, entitled Learning Collective Lessons and Doctrine Development. We have assembled a panel of civil and military experts from Belgium, Estonia, and France. The moderator for this roundtable will be Colonel retired Jean-Christophe Noël. from the Air and Space Strategic Studies Center. Jean-Christophe, before you introduce your topic and the distinguished guests from your panel, allow me to highlight some key moments in your rich career. You currently are an Associate Research Fellow at the IFRI Security Studies Center, Collector of Oral History at the French Military Historical Center, an Adjunct Professor at Sciences Po. Before that, before you retired from the military, you had a rich operational career, which, like Air Commodore Singer, make you a specimen of a rare species, a scholar warrior. You flew in your career most notably on Jaguar, having been deployed several times. Your natural inclination for thinking and writing led you to transition to positions of fellow to the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington, and at the Center for, and as a secondary, at the Center for Analysis, Planning and Strategy at the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Finally, you are also the expert, the referent on doctrine and air power at the French Air and Space Force Air and Space Strategic Studies Center, where you have launched a new review entitled Vortex, whose very first issue has just been released for the conference. So thank you for having accepted our invitation, Jean-Christophe, and I give you the mic.
Thank you very much, Richard. So we are late. So I'm going to start with a small discourse and then we will switch with our panelists. Dear Air Chief of Staff, dear directors, dear generals, dear officers, dear attendees, cher Hugues, cher Thomas, s'il est dans la salle. The seventh roundtable question is about the difficulties in bringing together lessons learned in a common document for all our air forces. Of course, we will not give all the answer to this question during the next hour, but we might touch on very important issues that such a subject could raise. And if you may, I would like to launch this session by tackling 4 issues, that is to say, the nature of this common document, its boundaries, its contents, and benchmarking. So first of all, what kind of documents do we really want? I would say that airmen tend to think very efficiently at the tactical and operational level. But I just wonder if we are not a bit too shy. It seems that the first roundtable yesterday was a kind of demonstration that the strategic level is sometimes preempted by diplomats, high-ranking civil servants, civilian advisor, etc., etc., etc. And there is not a lot of room left for us. But we have so much to say about air power and strategic effects. Just think, we have considerable assets that we should put forward just to nurture this strategic thought. Air power has always been one of the answers when you think about conventional deterrence, when you think about coercion. That's why I would say that we must be more ambitious and not hesitate to show how decisively airmen could influence a situation. So think big, think tactical, think operational, and think strategic, and right on all the levels of war. Secondly, the boundaries of this document. What I mean by boundary is how we should articulate it with the other services, agencies, armies, navies. How should we interact with them? Should we talk about us and only about us? Well, that would be great, of course. Should we think about jointness, interoperability? That would be better. Should we think multi-domain? That is to say air and space and cyber? That would be excellent, but at the same time, we should not stop there, because we all know that air and space and cyber has never been and will never be multi-domain. It's just a common way for us to try to benefit from the opportunities given by space and cyber to promote our own air operations. Pure multi-domain is about integrating ground, sea, air, space, cyber, and even some include a 6th domain, which is the man. So thinking in this way, I think, will force us to introduce new technology like artificial intelligence, like quantum, etc., that will help us keeping our superiority on the battlefield. So what do we want? Lessons learned, joint lessons learned, multi-domain lessons learned. For sure, integration alone of air, space, and cyber will be very difficult, but it could be the same, and it could be the first step to climb. But never forget the ultimate target, which is integrating all the domains. Thirdly, contents. Doctrine is supposed to encapsulate all the good practices for the best use of the military tools. Good practices that happened, lessons learned, and good practices that we have to anticipate. But what are the best practices today that we could take from our latest war missions, whether they happened in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Syria, or in Mali? For sure, this was war. But this may not be the same as the war to come, as we know the name of the new competitors today, Russia and China. Last time, for example, France and Great Britain waged war against Russia, it was during the Crimean War in 1854. Against China, it was 2 years later, during the Second Opium War in 1856, a long time ago, so in the 19th century. I think you will all agree with me when I say that we don't have any more valuable experience of high-intensity warfare, which is good news in a way. But these wars are completely different experiences. For example, we have to take into account attrition in our plan. That could definitely change the way we are fighting. Same thing with hybrid warfare. What does it mean for an air force with less than 10 squadrons, for example, to take off every day to intercept targets running around your boundaries? How does it erode your air force? Just ask the Taiwanese, for example. What will be the consequences in the long term? So if we want to write a doctrine on new kinds of war, let's trust the different generations of officers that are excellent, qualified experts on asymmetric and asymmetric warfare, but we need also to challenge them with war game, with red expertise, seminars, reading, etc., to stimulate them. Last and not least, benchmarking. Of course, our forces are not waiting this roundtable to think about lessons learned and doctrine. It will be very interesting to compare the different ways our countries favor to learn and absorb the lessons. Once again, this could be very, very stimulating. How do feedback work in France, in Finland, in Germany? Comparing the learning curves of our different military organizations while they were facing the 20-year war that began in 2001 could be very, very interesting. But at the same time, and I don't want to spoil the party, but we'll know, especially for us, European airmen, that have all been grown up with NATO procedures, that NATO is roaming in this room. What does it mean? How could NATO inspire any IE2 process without threatening it? That may seem not easy, but it is essential to think about it. Because what is at stake today is to know if there exists an embryo of European way of warfare. I'm not saying Western, but European. That might be something that is smaller for sure, but maybe more agile because of its size compared to the US, and more focused on our neighborhood. So as I've told you, think big, but also think small. Okay, I could go on and on as a question are probably as abundant as the numbers of lessons learned, but of course we don't have enough time. But I'm sure that we will find some tracks in this panel, thanks, for example, with the impressive CV. And I'm going to start with Colonel Juventin, Colonel Gilles Juventin, who joined the French Air Force Academy in 1987 and graduated as a fighter pilot 4 years after. He flew Mirage F1, different types of Mirage 2000, and spent also 3 years as an exchange pilot in the USAF, flying F-16 in New Mexico. He participated in 12 operational deployments in Bosnia, Iraq, Afghanistan, and Mali, and is now Deputy Commander of the Operation Directorate of the French Joint Staff, in charge of military employment policy, joint training, force structure, homeland defense, and strategic studies. The floor is yours, Colonel.
General, ladies and gentlemen, well, thank you for inviting me to this conference, even though I work at the Joint Staff. I was very interested by the last presentation. Most of us have participated in those operations from Desert Storm to Mali, and more recently to the Middle East. Turning lessons learned on what we see, what we take out of those operations, turning lessons learned into doctrine is one thing, and after that, it's another thing to turn doctrine into acquisition, training, and organization of a force structure. And so I would like to go behind the scene of those operations, that where the air power is involved. I'd like to go behind the scene and talk and try to explain how we do business, how we organize the armed forces and the training to be ready for tomorrow. I work at the Joint Staff at the Forces Employment Division. My division deals with lots of operational topics, as you mentioned, like homeland defense, operational readiness, force structure, doctrine, and strategic studies. As you can see, doctrine, even though it's very important and everybody has to read it, doctrine is only one part of a much larger equation. Of course, we work with all the divisions of the staff. We work with the CPCO, with the branches, the different services of the armed forces and our allies to make sure that all our actions are consistent. In a nutshell, what we do at the Joint Staff is to design framework of our joint military engagement in France and overseas, so our military commanders can plan and run their operations with trained, equipped, and ready to use, ready to employ joint forces. Jointness is a key word there. Even though we all have a very strong tactical experience on the different AORs, we always try to stay at the joint strategic and operational level. For example, we all know that the air component is a very powerful asset in the hands of a joint force commander. But we don't tell the Air Force how to plan air operations. We don't tell them how to actually fly the aircraft or use the UAVs. What we do is to make sure that everybody else in the AOR really really knows and understands what the Air Force, what the air component can bring him in terms of operational effects, provided that the air component is correctly planned, correctly integrated into the joint force structure, and that they receive valid and sound operational tasks and directives, objectives. Well, the thing is, in the short term, of course, we observe the reality of the military engagements in the theaters, the reality of military engagements and warfare. And we take out the lessons learned, we observe the emergence of new threats, new domains of confrontations, how the multi-domain operations are actually coming. And of course, our primary focus would be on the Sahel region, on counter-terrorism in the Middle East, where we are actually engaged on the ground in the air. But we also follow the situation in other parts of the world where there is no conflict right now, but we have strategic interests, like in our overseas, French overseas territories. We also observe the regions of the world where our main competitors or our potential enemies are running military operations or participating in conflicts of different types. So we update our joint doctrine and organize the joint and the combined training based on those observations and based on the trends that we observe. It's a continuous process. For example, we just updated our joint forces employment concept. That's the capstone of our doctrine. It's like book number 1, and everybody else derives from it. We also try to maintain the level of readiness that our forces and our headquarters must maintain so it can react to a crisis and deploy ready-to-use joint forces in case of a crisis or a conflict on very short notice. To do so, we use a capstone document called Contrat Opérationnel, something we could translate as permanent operational directives. It's not doctrine, it's a very actual document ready to use and for all to know. This document gives every single service, each operational command in France or stationed overseas, whether it's in the French overseas territories or abroad, a permanent operational contract that defines the level of readiness they have to maintain and what they're supposed to do just in case of a crisis or a conflict. Not only tells them what to do, also makes sure they all work together into the same direction if a crisis occurs. Some of them have to help each other, especially those who actually are stationed in the Pacific Ocean very far away from France. So they have to take the first blow and wait together, react together, wait together until the necessary reinforcements can arrive from France. That's in the operational directives. In the medium term, which would be like a 5 to 10 year time frame, we concentrate more on the evolution of a strategic environment and warfare. Our work is directly linked to the preparation and execution of a military programming act. That's the keystone. And we focus on the capacities we will need. Once again, we use the operational directives to do that job, to make sure we don't have any capacity gaps right now or in the next future. If we find something, if we find a capacity gap, now we try to find a solution to fill those gaps based on the operational priorities. For example, we are in the process of phasing out the old helicopters fleets and getting brand new ones. This is not going to happen overnight, but it will be a joint, continuous effort to make it happen before the end of his current military programming act, that is 2025 timeframe. At the same time, we mobilize the other branches of the Joint Staff to take the other aspects into consideration, which is human resources, infrastructures, force integration, joint logistics supports. So when the helicopters arrive, everybody's ready to actually employ them. Finally, in the very long term, that means 15 to 20 years from now, we try to envision what warfare will look like. And we make sure our model, and the one we try to build 10 years from now, will actually match and will be consistent with this evolution. Predicting the future of military engagements is not an easy task. At the same time, it would be useless to get ready for a conflict like Afghanistan or Mali, because it may never happen again. The only thing we can do right now is to make sure our forces, our headquarters, are trained, equipped, organized, ready to fight as a coalition or in joint national operations. And there are two things we need to keep in mind. The first thing is what we already mentioned but what we observed in the past may not happen again in the future. It will be different. The future is not bright, but it will be different. We're talking about high intensity engagements. For that, the second thing is we don't need one aircraft that costs millions of dollars. We need many aircraft and much more weapons. Actually, right now, the weapons are too expensive, so we don't have enough, and we will not have enough weapons if we need to fight a high-intensity war. That's what we call the mass. So mass, force integration, and that's the key. That's the key for the next operations that we will fight in the future, like 10 years from now. Sir.
Do you hear me? Yes. Okay. Thank you very much, Colonel Giventin. I'm going to ask Colonel Halbriers, so I'm going to give him the floor. So after the French point of view, we'll have another point of view from another European country. I'm just giving some highlights of a very impressive career of Colonel Brius. You started your military studies in 1986. You first qualified as the air defense controller. Joined in 1996 the NATO Airborne Early and Warning Control Force, again in Kirchen, in Germany. In 2006, you took your first command as squadron commander of the Air Defense Squadron in Glons. In August 2010, you were selected to follow the higher staff course at l'École de Guerre in Paris. 2012, you joined NATO for the second time in the Combined Air Operations Center. Then you became, 3 years after, the 24th base commander of Glons, and today, after this operation command, you were appointed to the Belgian Defense Strategic Department as director of the Integrated Capabilities, function you are occupying for the last 2 years. Okay, the floor is yours. You've got 10 minutes, Colonel.
Thank you very much, and I would like to thank France for this perfect organization of this conference, which is a pretty academic conference, and I've been to the previous EI2 conferences more as a readiness build-up posture, and I think I had a whole text prepared, but during the conference, which was very interesting, with very interesting speakers and very interesting insights that we have had in between, I decided to skip this text and to basically come back on the basics, because I think a lot of valuable things have been said, and this panel 7, is basically wrapping it up. If you talk about lessons identified, lessons learned, and doctrine, how you should say. So I'm definitely not going to repeat what my French colleague has said about the doctrines and concepts that have been developed, and I'm very happy to hear that France is leading edge on this perspective as well, and we definitely look, we're hearing the word of benchmarking. This is something which a very small country as Belgium is definitely needs to do, and so we're happy to look across the borders and see what valuable documents and principles are already available, and we are always happy to learn and to take, if allowed, to take a copy of that. I'm pretty amazed as well that for the 2 days there was no joke at all about the football EK. So I'm thinking that this was meant to be me then to make one, and that you're all afraid of our Belgian team. Yeah, we will kick ass. Our golden boys will probably, not reach the final, but anyway, we hope. Our trophy cabinet is still empty, and we hope to fill it in. So please bear with us and tell your teams this year is for Belgium. Okay, let's agree on this one. Thank you very much. Passing on, I would like to say that in Belgium we have been facing an audit about the processes in our headquarters in 2018-19. And a lot of things came out which are related to this panel about lessons identified, lessons learned, and about doctrines. It appeared that our processes that we had created in our staff were not lean enough, and we were overstaffed, and we thought that we had too many people doing too many things which are not necessary. So we had to revisit our processes, and so we created critical process team, and those teams analyzed the way of our process map. And the thing that we found out is that one little part, but so important, is that we forgot about how to integrate lessons identified, transform it in lessons learned. And a lessons learned, by the way, is only something when you have to change afterwards something. If it doesn't lead to change, that lessons learned is not a lessons learned. It's just a noted thing. So we found out that the process of the lessons identified, lessons learned should have been better. And that would also lead into my domain of capability integration building, and what the previous speakers have been announced as well, as being the impact on the capability development of your forces is going to be very important. Because for the moment we noticed that in Belgium the lessons identified, lessons learned process only led, and I'm quoting here Major General Edstrom here about what he said about the changes of TTPs and the TAM TTPs updates. And it also led to small tactical levels, as previously said, changes in the squadron on the tactical level. But it never led to the process of changing how we're going to approach the capability development in the future. So So this is one big lessons identified, and we're going to change it, so it's a lessons learned as well for Belgium, and we're going to do that. So I took already the part of the urgent operational requirements, and now I know we're going into the weeds, but I think there's so many academic stuff that has been already highlighted, and I don't want to kick in an open door anymore. So I really want to come to the level where we say, okay, what did we do? And the thing that we did with the lessons learned introduction was the urgent operational requirement. We changed the whole process, and now our commanders in the field, if they have a requirement that they need to get really fast on the terrain, we do it with that principle. And we found out that this is one of the big things. Of course, if we talk about doctrines, first we start with a concept. A concept leads to an idea, or an idea is in a concept. That concept leads to buying or thinking about the process of acquiring a new system. And then when your system is there, you start writing doctrines. When you start to go in operations, you start to say how you did it, and that's a doctrine. So that is what basically also is a big mistake by some people, that they mix concepts and doctrines together. So in my 2 tours of NATO in AWACS component and in the KEOC, I ended up into the standardization and evaluation office. And I've noticed that the way ahead, and I'm very, very happy that EI2 is giving us the opportunity within the 13 nations of at least starting at the starting point to do that, is to align our doctrines and the way that we work. I reference to the ample gain exercises that we had in the past, where we send out aircraft towards other nations, and then we had other technicians, foreign technicians, working on our aircraft and vice versa. These kind of things don't happen anymore. We left abroad that, or we left aside these kind of principles. We should bring that back. We should try to do that again. Now I know that since all the nations acquired very technological, high-level systems, and there is like always the contractor having still a hand in what we do with our systems, it's going to be very difficult to convince our contracting people to work or let a foreigner technician work on our systems. So that's going to be an issue, but then again, there is a will to do that, and we need to convince our people to manage it. So I think that is one part. So you have the lessons identified, lessons learned process that we have to align, and that is something which was being done in NATO. Yep, copy that. 2 minutes, right? That was my joke of the football that took me around. But the point is that in lessons learned, we need to line it up. We need to get it at a certain level of above the nations. Also for the doctrines, we need to share doctrines more. We need to be knowing how we develop things, how we're going to deploy. EI2 is giving us that opportunity. I mean, I was participant to the point where we said, okay, how are we going to manage if we deploy with 3 nations to Africa? Which airfield we're going to use? What are some procedures so that we at least can align our processes onto each other? And then the doctrines, that is something that is in the 3rd phase. That is something that we should share as well at a certain point. So I had a whole text in front of me. Maybe there's still some questions coming up, but I'm leaving the floor to my other colleagues. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ralph. Actually, if there is no joke about football, it's because we all know who's going to win, and it will not be Germany. So, guess who it is? We're going to get one step higher right now with the 2 last panelists. I'm sorry. I was thinking about penalty, but okay. With the 2 last panelists, and the first one will be Philippe Lavigne, who joined the Air Force in 1980. He graduated in 1982 and received his wings of fighter pilot 2 years after. As a fighter pilot, he participated to several overseas operational engagements in the Middle East, Africa, and the Balkans. He also served, he was also commanding officer of Cazo Air Base from 2004 to 2007. He served as deputy commanding officer and commanding officer of the Strategic Air Command in charge of nuclear deterrence in France. In 2015, he was appointed Deputy Secretary General for Defense and National Security. And 3 years later, in 2018, he joined the French National Space Agency as military advisor to the president. And I'm sure he's going to talk about space. Thank you very much, Philippe.
Thank you. I'm not sure everybody is hearing me. Is it working? Yes? Okay, thank you. It's a great honor to be here today, but I must admit it took me some time to figure out the exact substance of our discussion this afternoon. And I read it in the flyer presenting the agenda of the conference. Our panel is supposed to discuss challenges we face to put collective lessons learned on battlefields into doctrines and concept of operations. So reading this, two questions came to me almost immediately. And the first question is related to lessons learned themselves. Can we really speak of collective lessons learned for AI2 participants? That's the first question. And the second question is about doctrines. Should doctrines and concept of operations be solely elaborated from our combat experience? So let's start by addressing the issues raised by these two questions. But before, I must specify that I'm speaking on my own behalf and that my words do not reflect any official French position, of course. So the first question, can we really speak of collective lessons learned for AI2 participants? There's obviously a wide range of traditional political posture within the AI2 community regarding the security challenges that Europe is confronted to. As this is not new, was there long before the birth of AI2 and will probably last a while. As this situation has made our respective air forces different entities with different backgrounds, different combat experiences. And a look at the past, the recent past, and even the present confirms this point. Let me give you some examples. In 2003, very few AI2 countries participated to or even actively supported Operation Iraqi Freedom, whereas the UK military was heavily engaged in that conflict. In 2011, Germany didn't participate at all to the air campaign against Libya, while UK and France had a lead role in this crisis. And more recently in Syria, some AI2 countries were or are still involved in offensive missions. Some others don't participate to the air campaign, and others restrain their participation to air operations to non-kinetic missions. And finally, as the French Air Force had been fighting terrorism in Africa for 8 years now, no other European Air Force has ever engaged combat aircraft on that theater. So our respective air forces have clearly different combat experiences, and this has obviously consequences on the lessons they drew from their military engagements. And this situation weakens, according to me, the notion of collective lessons learned from the battlefield by AI2 community as a whole. And the second element is also weakening this notion. The notion itself of collective lessons learned is weakened by the differences we can see among the AI2 participants when it comes to their level of strategic ambition. It's no insult to other AI2 countries to recognize, for example, that France and the United Kingdom have a more strategic approach to crisis management than most of their AI2 partners. And these two countries therefore have the ambition and the means to do more than to bring a modest contribution to a coalition led by the United States. The lessons they learned from their military engagements under US leadership or in full autonomy are consequently quite different from those learned by their counterparts in the AI2 community. And there's a third element, which is weakening the notion of collective lessons learned for AI2. In addition to these political considerations, it's clear that operating certain equipment makes a difference when it comes to lessons learned from military operations. And in this regard, I have in mind armed drones, which only France and the United Kingdom have used in combat among the AI2 countries, and of course the F-35. the way in which this combat aircraft and its environment operate is indeed specific enough, in particular in terms of data management, to distinguish the operational experience acquired by its owners from the one acquired with other weapon systems. So you may have understood my opinion now. At the end of the day, I believe that we can hardly speak of collective lessons learned from the battlefields for the EI2 participants as a whole. This doesn't mean for sure that there are no lessons learned by one or the other that can usefully be known by other partners and, of course, considered. The second question is about doctrines. Should doctrines and concepts of operation be solely elaborated from lessons learned on the battlefields? It would indeed appear very unwise not to use the experience gained on battlefields to prepare the future conflicts. And needless to insist on the necessity, by the way, to keep in this process a critical mindset in order not to prepare the next war thinking it will be similar to the previous one. And in this regard, I remember how we were surprised in the French Air Force during the Gulf War in 1991 by the medium altitude profile of the missions, as we had been training forever at very low altitude in the logic of a major war in Central Europe. So this being said, it's obvious that we have all made a lot of progress in our capacity to operate and fight collectively, thanks to the air operations we have conducted together the last 30 years. And it's a good thing because the number of fighter jets in Europe will become so small, even critical in some countries, that it becomes illusory for most European air forces to envisage a significant long-term military commitment outside the coalition. Therefore, our capacity to operate and fight together will more and more make our strengths, both militarily and politically. That's why our doctrines have to integrate interoperability as a core requirement. And to be honest, as it was mentioned earlier, the air operations carried out together have also revealed several capability shortfalls. Air-to-air refueling, PGM stockpiles are two of them among others. And in these two areas, the dependence of the Europeans on US capacities clearly appeared in all our past engagements. And this situation requires a corrective effort, which I will come back to in a moment. But the experience gained in combat cannot, of course, be the only element considered in the process of developing doctrines and concepts of operations. Proceeding this way, we would only consider the past, whereas future challenges, as they appear, must obviously be part of the equation as well. And three of these challenges particularly hold my attention and should, from my point of view, mobilize the Europeans. The first challenge is about our capacity to operate in less permissive environments, and this will require a priority effort in terms of OCA and SEED capabilities. The second challenge is related to the integration into our forces of the new weapons and the new space capabilities which are appearing at a rapid pace and which are likely to greatly improve air power efficiency in the near future. And perhaps the most structuring of the challenges for the Europeans succeed in connecting in combat the F-35 to the other aircraft in service in Europe in order to maximize the operational synergy between these different platforms. So guidelines for the development of a common doctrine. According to me, you have understood my position. The notion of lessons learned, of common lessons learned, is fragile, and combat experience should not be the only reference in the development of a common doctrine. But this being said, I believe that a common doctrine would be of a real interest, and identifying its main guidelines would therefore certainly be wise. And I personally identify three guidelines. The first one can be considered as a minimal basis and consists in improving our mutual knowledge until it is as intimate as possible. And to this end, our crews should train hardly together again and again. And as a former Tiger Squadron CEO, I have in mind on this subject the model put in place by Tiger units. The Tiger community has been vibrant for quite a while now, and it allows its crews to train together regularly and get to know each other personally. And needless to say, it makes fighting together much easier and operational efficiency greatly superior. The second card line is to reduce our capability shortfalls in a pragmatic way. In a nutshell, keep it simple and practical when it comes to improve our operational efficiency. And in this logic, two initiatives deserve to be mentioned. The A2G PGM initiative taken by NATO to reduce the weakness already mentioned in our European stocks of PGMs. The collective purchase of PGM in 2018 by the 13 nations participating to this initiative have thus made it possible, according to NATO, to reduce the cost of each ammunition by 15 to 20%, and that's an easy gain. And the second initiative is the so-called MMF project, MMF standing for Multinational MRTT Fleet. This project, as you know, allows 6 European countries to jointly equip themselves with 9 Airbus MRTT, and that's certainly a good example of a pragmatic and effective approach to reduce European weakness in the field of air-to-air refueling. And the third guideline is more political and consists, while seeking operational efficiency, to recognize our diversities within the I2 community and to make them a strength. In practice, it means to look for the best balance between the very positive effects of the NATO logic of standardization and the integration of European diversity in terms of interests and equipment. And put it bluntly, all of us do not use the F-35, but we are all going to combat with the same NATO combat procedures. Another example, within the I2 community, some countries are more interested or focused on the Russian behavior, and others are taking more interest by fighting terrorism in Africa, but they are still belonging to the same political union most of the time. So the existence of these opposing forces has to be recognized, accepted, and integrated into a common political approach that places more value on common interests than our differences. And this is certainly very demanding, but if we do not succeed in this endeavor, and this will be my concluding words, borrowed to Marshal Montgomery, will be exposed to the risk of losing the war in the air, which means losing the war and losing the war quickly. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Philippe. So you didn't speak about space, but this time I'm sure that our next speaker will do it, and it's my great pleasure to introduce Mr. Paul Lias, who is Head of Space at the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Communication. Paul has created the Estonian Space Policy and Program 2020-2027. Today he's working on Estonian national space legislation and a decentralized e-government solution for space traffic management. Paul is part of the Estonian delegation to ESA and European Union Space Program. I'm sure you're going to show us that when there is a will, there is a path. The floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me here. So I'm, as you can see already from my title, so I'm new to this kind of event. Normally I'm attending more space domain related conferences. However, it's very interesting to see what's going on here in more in the defense domain. And yes, I'm head of space at the Ministry of Economic Affairs, and I'm responsible for the development of the Estonian space policy. And earlier I have been building satellites also by myself, so I'm very aware about the space sector in general, and what is new space and what are the challenges there. So my main task in back home is to find the right space for the Estonian technology sector. So how can we contribute? And as you know, then Estonia is not really, no one knows Estonia as a space power. So basically my task is to change it. So hopefully everyone will knows Estonia because of that. And Estonia is more known for our heritage in e-governance, e-Estonia, and cybersecurity. So Estonia is known as a digital country, and our aim is actually to bring the knowledge we have gathered already in defending us from cyber attacks, how we have built e-governance, how we have built our e-state. So how can we bring this knowledge to the space domain? And so it's one of the challenges we are working right now. So our main aim is to really how can we contribute with our knowledge in, for example, in cybersecurity, to the growth of the space sector. And as you know, then from the new space perspective, there are many new challenges. For example, also cybersecurity related, because many of those new companies who are developing constellations or technology demonstration satellites, then let's say they don't focus on the security aspects, and there are many people also who say that it is not really an issue, but in the end it will be an issue for the governments who own or who have registered the satellites, since they are responsible for them. So what will happen if someone takes the missions, or worst even constellations over? So what's the role of the government? How can we help the companies then to get their satellites back, and how can we learn about how to defend our infrastructure in space? So I think that the questions are very similar in the civil and also for the space, for the military satellites. So therefore, in Estonia we have started two different activities. One is space cybersecurity missions. So how can we bring the Estonian knowledge in what we have gathered on ground, the space domain in cybersecurity, and then space traffic management. So how to really develop a secure platform, like we have our e-state to exchange data and pre-notifications between governments and satellite operators. So if I talk more about the cybersecurity missions, it's a very we started with it just last year actually, but we have already very good and interesting developments going on there. So what we are doing is, so our companies are developing applications and verifying it in space for how to defend, for example, then the satellite or the service. And we have started building space cybersecurity exercises. And cybersecurity exercises are nothing new. So cybersecurity exercises have been around for more than a decade, but the space component hasn't been used that much. And this year we had also the first exercise together with the NATO Cooperative Cyber Defense Center of Excellence in Tallinn, where the first space cybersecurity scenario was also introduced, and we had more than 2,500 participants, I think, from all countries, or representatives from all countries you are also coming from. So it was a very, very interesting first experience, how really we can learn and think about the challenges if, for example, your ground segment is being attacked, and with the aim to also attack then the infrastructure on orbit. And that's why should we do it, is because, of course, we have more satellite operators coming in the next years. And as I mentioned already before, then many new space companies and satellite operators that don't really think about on the security aspect today, because everything they develop has to be efficient, and it will raise the cost of what they are doing. So now here's the challenge: how can we protect these missions in the future? And exactly those cybersecurity exercises will help then us to learn about the potential threats and prepare for the future. So today we have been using only software simulators, but in the next years we are also planning to add to the cybersecurity exercises also then real infrastructure on orbit. And another topic I also mentioned is space traffic management, which is also very closely connected to space cybersecurity, and how can we trust all parties. And space traffic management is all about the trust and communication. And there are many similarities with e-governance that Estonia has been developing for the past decades. And we are planning right now to build the first e-service. So how can you really make the registration of satellites possible, and not only registration but also operation? So how can we monitor all commands sent to satellites and have more control over what is going on with our objects? And hopefully soon we can also build the first demonstration of it. So yes, it's a very short overview what we are doing, and I think that especially the space cybersecurity aspect, what we should learn about what can really happen to the space infrastructure, it is new. Of course, there have been incidents in the past years, but I think the worst things are maybe ahead of us, and we should prepare already today how to deal with these issues, and hopefully we can even prevent the worst case scenario. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. It was very inspiring. I've got good news. We have 10 minutes left, and this panel is really a success because we have a lot of questions. I suppose it's because we talk about doctrine and not football, but anyway. So I've got 3 questions, and then I will ask you maybe to answer in something about 2 minutes, so that we could leave the floor at the right time. The first question is, I think it's a Frenchman who asked it, because it starts with, is it possible? So, is it possible to draw a collective lessons learned on both high and low intensity conflicts? Maybe for you, Colonel. I've got 2 other ones. What dimensions of action, training, exercises, formation, operation, will be included in an eventual common return of experience? And how will the member states use them? And the last one is maybe for Philippe and Paul. Could it be possible to learn some collective lessons from space operations and then eventually draw a common space doctrine between our nations in a few years? So you've got 7 minutes to answer it all. Let's start maybe with the first one. So collective lessons learned on both high and low intensity conflicts, if you want, Colonel.
Well, the thing is, everybody knows what a low-intensity conflict is. That's what we've been fighting for the last 20 years. As a collective lessons learned, I'd say that it actually puts a lot of strain on the people and on the equipment as well. High-intensity conflicts, on the other hand, is different challenge. Attrition, the need for large numbers of aircraft, tanks, artillery, military people on the ground, headquarters. It's a challenge by itself. The thing is, 10 years from now, it's not only a distinction between high intensity and low intensity we think we're going to be facing. We think we're going to be facing a different type of warfare, which is a hybrid warfare, which is a high-intensity warfare against a conventional enemy that can also trigger some asymmetric operations in our home, for example, at home in France, in Europe, in other parts of the world. So it actually derives us from the actual fight against him. So collective lessons learned in high intensity, low intensity is that we have to be ready for both. And for that, we need weapons, lots of weapons, and lots of aircraft, lots of military people, or we're going to lose.
Okay, thank you very much. For the next one, Ralph, if you want to catch it, could it be possible to learn some collective lesson? No, I'm sorry, it's just what dimensions of actions, so training, exercises, formation, operation, will be included in an eventual common return of experience, and how will the member states use them?
That's a very good question, but I would first maybe jump back on the other one about doctrines. I mean, I would like to say just one little thing about doctrines. I mean, it's not because we have ACPs, NATO doctrines, and other doctrines that we cannot derive our own operational doctrines at a lower level. So I just want to be sure that this is the message that we could get, but we don't have to reinvent every time the new wheel. I mean, there are documents out there which have been staffed through the headquarters and which have been useful documents been proved in the past. So we can derive our own doctrines from that. So that's a point. Then for the multilateral exercise, so I'm talking here about multilateral exercises, trainings. This is already going on. I mean, we just intensify what we are already doing. From Belgium, for instance, we have a very close relationship with all our neighboring nations in all the domains of acquisition, like F-35. We also very hard working on the cooperation with France into the Scorpion land force domain. We are working at the NFH with Holland and the UK. We are also in the A4 Armée. I mean, you see there's a lot of domains where we can do training, exchange of expertise, and I think we should now start to develop and maybe think what we did in the past. We did it well. It was not so bad, but then for certain reasons we lost the habit of it, and I think we have to restart that process. But something existed in the past which worked fine, so go back, do some benchmarking and try to get everybody aligned and see what we can do. But to do it with 13 nations at the same time, I don't think it's going to be possible. I think we should do it step by step, multilateral part, binational, and then build up step by step. That's my point of view. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ralph. Philippe and Paul, if you want to jump on the last one. So collective lessons from space operation and common space doctrine at the end. 2 minutes.
Yes, collective lessons from the space domain. It's very difficult to say at least from the Estonian perspective, since we haven't had yet a real experience in space. So it's something we are still learning. So the lessons to be learned, I think it's more the question here.
Philippe? Nothing less to add?
I'll come back to what I said. How can we speak of collective lessons learned? How many EI2 countries have space capabilities? Very few, so we cannot speak of any collective lessons learned regarding space activities up to now. In the future it will be, of course, very different. And second comment is that today's up to now, space operations are more or less support operations conducted from space. So they are dual-use operations, more technical than military. And tomorrow we will have a new kind of operations which will be aiming to interact on space platforms from another platforms, for example, and this will be a completely new environment, and the problem will be treated another way. And this time, maybe we will be in a position to speak of lessons learned from the combat fields, but it's not the case today.
Thank you, Philippe. I was sure that you would talk about space in this panel. Ralph, if you want to end this session?
Yes, please. Just a little add-on, and I do agree with the general, of course, but the point is that we shouldn't look in too far when we talk about lessons, collective lessons identified. I can give you already one. In the domain of space, we already identified that we have lack of SATCOM. And I think that's something which is a general perception in all the forces that we already have with our investments that we did. We know we're going to be lacking SATCOM in the future. So this is already some of the lessons identified, lessons learned that we can adapt in the future, because now we have to buy more. and we have to look for cooperation, multilateral and bilateral.
Thank you very much, Ralph. Thank you very much to all speakers. Please join me to applaud them. And I leave the floor to Richard.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Jean-Christophe. Thank you very much, all the speakers of the panel, for your insight and candid points regarding doctrine. What I like about doctrine is that it is indicative, not authoritative, and I think that's the good news. Let's take a break. We have relaxed a little bit since we unfortunately know that Minister Parly will not be here physically with us today, and we have received a video so that we will show right after our last round table. So let's take a break and get back in the seats at 40, please. 40. Thank you. And while we are going to take the break, we are going to pass some video. And General Lavigne, sir, yesterday you mentioned an exercise. We have found a short video about this exercise. So for those of you who are willing to watch it, FRA exercise, it's 1.5 minutes.
Décollage, top. Pour des mesures actives de sécurité aérienne sur un appareil perche contact radio. Requesting 1 CBU on each compound. Copy, steady target.
online.
So, for Sirs, Madam, for the 8th and final roundtable of this first EI2 Air and Space Power Conference, we are delighted to confirm that Chiefs of Air Staff accepted to speak. To moderate their discussions, allow me to welcome Dr. Thomas Gomard, to whom I defer the privilege of introducing them. Sir, you hold a PhD in history from Paris 1, Paris 1, Panthéon-Sorbonne, and an MBA from HEC. You started your professional career as an assistant professor at La Sorbonne, served 1 year in the Armée, and then had an experience as an entrepreneur. You joined the French Institute of International Relations, IFRI, in 2004 as the director of its Russia NIS Center, then raised to the position of VP for Strategic Development, and since 2015, you are IFRI's director. While at IFRI, you also served several fellowships in various centers and institutes. As your career indicates, you are expert in international relations, international defense and security questions, particularly regarding Russia, energy, and digital governance. You have written and contributed to many books and articles. The title of your last opus, Nos prochains défis géopolitiques, in English in the text, Our Next Geopolitical Challenges, sounds as a perfect transition to this last roundtable. Sir, over to you.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's the final session. I think it's maybe the most important one because we have to sum up everything in 1 hour. So I don't want to pressure you, gentlemen, but what you have to say is highly expected by all of our friends. It's a real pleasure for me as director of IFRI to moderate this final session. I have to maybe to say a few words to start this discussion. First of all, I would like to refer to what was said by General Lavigne in his initial remarks about the need to combine short-term perspective, crisis management namely, with long-term perspective, what is related to procurement, trading, and other matters. And I was told that the discussion during these 2 days were very substantive, precisely on this attempt to deal with the difference of tempos, the operational tempo with the strategic tempo, which is at the core of the 2 days discussions. What was said, there was many things said about threats, joint threat perception, about intensity, about operations, and I think that in this session, if you agree with me, we will try to resume this discussion. In terms of takeaways, I have 5 letters to try to sum up what was said during these 2 days. The first letter is A. A like anticipation. Anticipation, as I said, of the threat is essential. This is a driver for developing a common vision of the challenges to be met, especially in a European perspective. The second letter, it is F, like freedom of action. In the context of high-intensity operation, air and space power have a primary role to play in also freedom of action by ensuring, as it was said many times during these 2 days, by ensuring air superiority and air power projection. The third letter, it is E, like education and training, which is at the core of our discussion. Air and Space Force personnel must be educated in the use of high technology, knowledge of its partners, and understanding of the enemy. Fourth letter, it is E, interoperability, which is another key tenet. It can be achieved through connectivity and data management. And the last letter, it is C, like a combination. And I think that's what was very interesting during this today was this attempt to think about the better, the most possible combination between industry, procurement agency, and obviously operation. So that's my way to try to sum up what was said. There was many other things which was discussed during these 2 days, but it was maybe to frame the discussion. So let me introduce the very prominent speakers who are for this last panel. I will start by introducing, in the order I was given, General Lavigne, who is the Chief of Staff of the French Armed Forces. There is also with us Lieutenant General Rosso from Italy. We have Major General Carl-John Enstrom from Sweden. And we have Air Chief Marshal Mike Winston from the UK. Gentlemen, I would suggest to respect this order if you don't disagree. I will let you approximately 7-8 minutes to make your statement, sorry. And after that, we will gather the question from the audience. Mon Général, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Maybe I will be quicker in order to get more questions, because I think exchange is the best. And so we have talked about air and space power. So it was very hard, and as Churchill has said, air power is the most difficult of all forms of military force to measure or even express in precise terms. And I can say that if it's difficult to precise or even to express, it's much more easy to do so as a team. And it's the way, and it was the objective of this E2I forum, speaking about air and space power. So thank you very much for the organization and for your presence, dear Alberto, Mike, and Carl-Johan. How to boost European defense? It's but in the field of air and space power. So I think we have many things that we can use, and what we have seen it during these 2 days. I think the first one is to share strategic view, and we have to develop it. We have to write a core paper. It can be as the strategic compass. It can be the development of a spatial defense strategy. We have talked about that before. How are we going to tackle the threats? How are we going to manage the future air battle? So it could be, for example, as a collaborative air warfare, and we have to talk about that and to write about that in order to give to others what will be our operational requirements. The second thing is how to boost European defense. Well, it's organization. Organization are the place where we are talking about air power, the place where we are defining the rules, the place where we are tackling the problems and finding solutions. Organization, we've got already many organizations. If I go back to the past, there was a small bilateral organization between Royal Air Force and France. It was in 1995. It's a group, and it became European air groups. And in that groups, we are doing a lot of things, talking about interoperability, but at a tactical level, and tackling very precise problems. We've got under these groups as the intelligence to add the intelligence to create other groups like EATC, the European Air Transport Command, and we are 7 European countries in that training, in that transport command, and we are doing so many things, more than 200,000 passengers, more than 20,000 tons per year, for example, of airlift. We've got also some agency, European Defense Agency. We've got some organization like OCARS. We've got some others tools. For example, the permanent structure cooperation. We've got the European funds. We've got the E2I. So it's an organization of willing nations who wants to tackle and to take into account all the problems we are facing at. The third one is our capabilities. We are talking about capabilities among with our industrial, with our procurement agencies. So we have how to boost European defense is, for example, to get same capabilities, but we've got already same C-160, Alpha Jet, A400M, MRTT, etc., etc. So it's the way we can have and we can boost European defense. Of course, we can talk about eco-war. We can talk about a lot of things. We have the this in our hands. We have to fix the problems of digital, to fix the problem of data. So we have also to write and to think and to establish standards, for example, for data for the future. We were talking about F-35, and I was with Mike for the Atlantic Trident, and I just received the U.S. commander of the detachment, and I asked him, well, hey, what are you asking? What is your first question when you deploy in Mont-de-Marsan Air Force Base? He said, because in the past, when we land on that on the foreign airfield, we are looking for fuel. We are looking for he asked me connectivity. Okay, it's connectivity first, and so we have to take this into account. And if we don't have the same capabilities, it's not a matter to boost European defense. We have to be interoperable, and we are working about that. For example, with Ingo, the German air chief, and with Javier, we've got a roadmap on our legacy aircraft in order to merge our capacities in order to be more and more interoperable. So if we've got different equipment, we have to be sure that they are linked and that we can work together. Of course, capabilities, and in Europe, and we have talked about that, we need enablers. We need enablers to act. There are so many enablers, of course, airlift, air-to-air refueling, but they've got for Intel, of course, and we've got enablers as space. Action, and the last point is strategy to boost European defense. Well, actions. So we can have actions where education and training. So we have to share. We share a lot, but we have to share more and more. And we've got many opportunities share more. If I just thinking about the transports, we will have the need for new aircraft, new equipment in about 7 to 8 years. So I'm already thinking about the opportunity to share this type of school for airlift. We have also talked about logistics. I think that we are doing, but we have to ease. If we've got the same equipment, we have to create the conditions to ease how to share the spare parts, how to be sure that we can use them. And of course, how to boost European defense, well, while acting. Air policing, for example. We are doing a lot of cross-border measures. Air mobility, air-to-air refueling, UAVs also, and of course, power projection. So that concludes just my few words for the moment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, mon général. I jump now to Lieutenant General Rousseau. So, sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a good opportunity even to show how close several European air forces are. We are sitting together. We are on very friendly terms, and I think it's a good indication on how strong the will to cooperate is throughout our responsibilities. So I will share some few thoughts with you, just starting from what Philippe already said. As Chief of the Air Forces, I think we have the responsibility to provide real air power capabilities to the needs of our coalitions and our sovereign government. And this is the first point. To do that, I think we have to look at what we have now and try to optimize the common and shared use of present capabilities every day. I'll come back to that later on. At the same time, I think it's our responsibility to look forward as far as possible to see what will be the future needs that the air services will have to provide in order to be effective and credible in unpredictable scenarios. At the same time, we have to connect present situation to the future trends, which means that we have to do many, many things at the same time. And being practical, I think the first thing, I probably am not saying anything new, but trying to round up and highlight some of the many good points that throughout the conference has been already mentioned. Interoperability, I think, is one of the key words of yesterday and today speeches. Sometimes we have to go back to basics. It has been mentioned already. Nowadays, we don't even have the same capabilities to cross-service aircraft as we had 20 years ago. So we lost some of the capability to be interoperable between European countries. So sometimes we have to go back to basics and do some basic training to understand how we can help each other. The US is utilizing in Europe agile combat deployment, which is a principle which I think is absolutely valid for us as well. Being able to deploy, if needed, in a friendly country and be able to be supported as much as possible. So logistics, it's an absolutely important part of what we do. If we go one step forward, another very used word has been connectivity. And this is the key word to me to connect what we presently have to the future needs. Technology, all the fast pace of changes in technology, and especially in the air domain, require us to have systems which will be more and more connected. But again, we have to start working on what we have now. We are, for example, promoting exercises just to optimize the use of Link 16, which is the common data link that we share, which is old, probably is not sufficient to the future needs, but we are not using as much as we should. So this is another field where I think it's important that we provide interoperability, additional exchanges, additional exercises in order to be able to optimize the connectivity that we have, because connectivity is at the basis of the capability that air system will be able to provide. And I believe it is also the starting point toward multi-domain operations or joint all-domain operations. It will start with connectivity. So this is one of the critical points, which is exactly the same baseline that we have to think anytime we program or study a new program, a new acquisition. Again, interoperability in the highest level will be just to have the same system with the same standard, with the pilots or air crews trained in the same way, which are absolutely able to integrate and to operate together. But there are several different layers of capabilities which should, as a minimum, be able to provide. So again, we should, if we are going to develop new systems, and maybe by chance I see 3 countries which are together participating in the Tempest program, which will be a new 6th generation air system. It's a demonstration of how things could be done better. Producing 2 different systems for the future in Europe probably is not the best way to demonstrate that we are a common Europe. At the same time, as an operator, I think that the baseline would be that even if the chassis, the body of the systems will be different, well, they must be fully connected. We should be able to utilize the same standard as far as data links, sensors, maybe weapons, same training, in order to be as interoperable as possible. I think that is the baseline, not only for the present, but also for the future. I think it is our responsibility to work hard in that direction. Another issue which has been highlighted already is the integration between the 4th and the 5th generation. Italy is one of the lucky countries and Air Force to be able to see the capability of a 5th generation air system. So we are not integrating the F-35 within the Italian Air Force, but we are adapting the whole Italian Air Force to a 5th generation environment, which is a completely new challenge, most complex challenge. But it's the way to go forward. Being the F-35 just an example of what a 5th generation air system is capable of doing. And we must be able to share those capabilities with all the other countries. In each of our own countries, 4th generation old legacy systems will be in the inventory for the next 20 to 25 years as a minimum. So it is an absolute must to be able to integrate as much as possible new 5th generation systems with the legacy one. We are trying to do it with exercises, with training not only in Italy, but with other friendly countries. And it is valid from an operational perspective. It is valid from a maintenance perspective. It is fundamental from the security standpoint, which is a nightmare, which is a burden sometimes, but it is one of the challenges that we will have to face for all new systems. So we have a lot to learn from integrating a very complex and difficult system, but this is probably something that we have to learn to do with future systems. So many challenges at the same time, even because I think the airspace power is maybe the only one which has its own political and strategic impact, and at the same time it's fundamental to support any surface operation. So we have a double responsibility. Thank you much.
Thank you very much, sir. I turn now to... I respect this order, I respect the order of my paper. So I will respect the order of my paper. So I turn now to Major General Edstrom. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. To begin with, I would like to take the opportunity to thank the French Air Force, General Lavigne, and also, of course, the staff of the CI2 for a really good 2 days of seminar. I leave in this seminar with new ideas, common interests that I have been speaking to both my colleagues and others here, and also with the feeling of that we are moving into a very interesting future where we have a lot of possibilities to make this air power, a stronger European air power. I would like to talk a little bit about, not to echo what's already been said, but touch about cooperation, training, interoperability, and leadership and culture, these 5 areas. But to begin with, on the stage here, I stand out a little bit, being not a NATO member, being an enhanced PFP nation, which puts us as a country in a slightly different strategic position maybe, while we are facing a lot of common strategic challenges. And our way as a country to dealing with these challenges is, of course, like you are talking about, through cooperations, where we try to put our strengths and our competence and capabilities on the table. As I touched on in today's first round table, I'm a strong believer in the European cooperation. And for us, this starts with a strong regional cooperation to deal with common challenges, like in our case, the security situation around the Baltic Sea and in the High North. This is the foundation of the NORDEFCO cooperation, and why Sweden has declared that we will not stand aside if another Nordic country is attacked. This is natural, as a security crisis in our region would have a major complication and implication for all of the Nordic countries. So the regional cooperation is also a good way of setting up good training together to be better with dealing with our common challenges. But it's also a good example, I would say, is the recently conducted the Arctic Challenge exercise, held in the northern part of Sweden, Norway and Finland, with an airspace actually stretching all over the 3 countries, all the way out to the Atlantic Sea, totaling the almost the area of Germany, at least from east to west. And this exercise was sprung out of our Nordic cooperation and weekly cross-border training. But since 2013, it has grown, and this is what I'm coming to. It has grown from a regional exercise today to be a European exercise, hosting many European countries and also the US Air Force. So it's a good example of how regional cooperation, once established, can grow into something bigger to benefit the European family and European air power. And I think we should look for all this regional cooperation and try to build them into something bigger. It's a way to go forward. And to continue, looking at an intervention with Europe, I think we need to look more into a collective basing concept. You know that I'm talking about the basing concept. To be able to quickly deploy and to start operation, even if we start out as reactive. And this is something that would benefit both CSDP countries and NATO. And I know that USAF also took advantage of the Arctic Challenge exercise just 2 weeks ago to train agile combat employment. And this is something we should continue to do. And if you go from there to interoperability then, to further our cooperation in putting our various capabilities, as you were talking about, to their best use, one of the focus points of this exercise was to integrate also the 4th and 5th generation platforms. And this is one of the most important hurdles we have to pass to improve interoperability also, to be able to integrate the 4th and 5th generation fighter. But interoperability is also the foundation of that we have to continue to building together if we are to succeed in dealing with future strategic challenges. We need to continue to develop and plan, and above all train what we are calling to achieve the day zero connectivity. We can't wait until the operation is running. We need to achieve day zero connectivity. So without the day zero connectivity, and joint projects like the federated mission networks. We will struggle, I think we will struggle in achieving joint all-domain engagements, both in our home theaters against a peer adversity, as well as in an intervention operation in another area, or in another theater. And we also need to ensure that interoperability is not just between our European air forces, but also with our other branches to achieve a joint all-domain engagement capability. And finally, as I touched on table 5 earlier, the challenge is not only ensuring a basic interoperability, but interoperability and effectiveness even after you have been attacked by a capable aggressor also. That's important, I think. And to end also, we were talking about that during lunchtime here, leadership and culture. I think we all are coming from a long period of time where maybe we haven't built capabilities. We have tried to keep capabilities and even being reducing capabilities and organization. And now we are facing a time here we will grow both in organization and we will grow also in capabilities. And then it's very important to embrace and support a leadership that is more forward-leaning, a leadership that questions the structures and methods that we have been putting up the last 20 years. And also a culture of innovation, a culture where everyone on all levels are finding new methods and new process to focus on actually the operational effects. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Before coming back with my question, I give the floor for the final initial statement to Air Chief Marshal Wigston. So the floor is yours.
Good, thank you very much, and I echo the other chiefs. Gratitude, Philippe, to you for the invitation and to your brilliant team for the seminar and all of the side conferences we've had as well. It's been very useful and very thought-provoking, so thank you and well done, everybody. I'm in talking about how a strategy for European security, I'm in the very fortunate, the very lucky position that this year the UK has announced a strategic review, and that started with a remarkable financial settlement of an additional 28 billion euros for defence over the next 4 years. And that process, as it does in all of our countries, took 12, 18 months. And I would observe that through that 18-month process, there were 3 big themes that emerged, and I think they are relevant to this conversation at the top level. The first one is that the international context is more uncertain and more dynamic, and there are fast-evolving threats, both above and below the threshold of what we have, in all of our careers, we have regarded as conflict, and that we need a new way and a new prism of thinking about that, and that's as important for our government as it is for us as air forces. The second one from a national perspective was that my government gave a very clear signal that it saw the United Kingdom as being a problem-solving, burden-sharing nation that's active on the world stage, and that's active in supporting the open and resilient international order that all of us in our free societies and our connected societies rely on for our prosperity and our security. And the third one, the really good bit, the bit why I say I'm fortunate, is that it was a very clear signal of the importance of the UK armed forces in that contribution to and that central part of our security and our prosperity. So throughout that process, as an Air Force and as an Air Chief, our message was consistent and clear. And I was delighted to hear Professor Asinga earlier paraphrase the message that I have been speaking about throughout this last year. And that's that air and space power gives our government the ability to act on a world stage, the ability to act at speed, at range, precisely, and with minimal political risk and maximum political choice. And just as France said earlier, we've also proved ourselves the decisive enabler to operations in the maritime and land environments, and we are decisive in ourself. And throughout that process, we have, for the Royal Air Force, day in, day out, our people were demonstrating that by protecting the skies and patrolling the seas around the UK and NATO and the Falkland Islands, supporting the government of Iraq, supporting NATO missions in Afghanistan, supporting French and United Nations missions in Mali. All of that was going on a day-to-day basis, demonstrating the utility of air and space power. But in that uncertain and complex international environment, I think the most extraordinary challenge for us as air forces and air and space forces is the pace of change, and the pace of change that's driven by the weekly revolutions in digital technology. And that manifests itself in fast evolving threats and a pace of change that if we don't keep up with that pace of change, we will lose the decisive edge that we have enjoyed for over 3 decades. And there's another challenge for us as air and space chiefs, and that's that control of the air that we have enjoyed for the last 3 decades, that almost unchallenged control of air and space, is now slipping away. And as more sophisticated missile systems, as more sophisticated aircraft and platforms and equipment is fielded by our adversaries, for the first time in a generation, we're going to have to contemplate how we fight for control of the air in a way that our predecessors didn't. So there is a really important role for us as air forces, as air and space forces, to be ready and innovative in the way that we embrace new technology and the way that we think about things differently. The changing culture that Carl-Johan just spoke about is a really important element of how we continue and how we prop up that strategy for security in Europe. Because ultimately we need to be able to act faster. Well, we need to understand, we need to be able to decide and then act faster and more accurately, make better decisions and do them in more places around the world than we have done. And we need to be at the heart of the integrating of the activity in the land domain, in the maritime domain, in cyber and in space. And I say space last there because space matters to all of us in our private lives and in the unique operational advantage it gives us. But there are things happening in space, as we heard earlier from Michel, that should give all of us, not just in air and space forces, or not just in military, but across society should be concerned. We see countries like Russia and China, some of their activities, some of the equipment that they're fielding gives us cause for concern, and we have said so publicly. And so there is a really pressing demand, as we heard from Michel earlier, to build our understanding of what is going on in space, and then to collectively work out how we can share that information, how we can protect our critical interests, critical infrastructure in space, and perhaps one day be ready to defend it. Because if we don't think about that now and put the pieces in place now, it will be too late come the day that we need to do it. I'll very quickly just say one other security thing that I think is something that we've got to start talking about as European Air Forces. And you're going to think I'm crazy for saying this, but it is about environmental sustainability. Because I think our publics are increasingly asking of us, and they are voters, and our parliamentarians are increasingly asking of us. And I think we are going to have to start now, because it will take years, and it's not a legacy that we can afford to leave for our successors. A lot of it will be on the backs of what the commercial aviation sector does around synthetic fuels, around zero-emission aircraft. But I think there's an important role for the air chiefs of today to think and talk about this. And I look into the room as well as you as future leaders, because you're the people that are actually going to have to deliver this over the next 10, 20 and 30 years. So to finish, in conferences like this, we often talk about equipment and aircraft and platforms and technology, but actually none of that really matters if we can't attract and recruit and retain the quality and talent of people we need. And as I look to the future strategic environment, it will be the quality and talent of all of our people that will give us our enduring decisive edge. And going back to Carl's final point, that people won't be enough, because again, if we've got, we collectively we could be spending more than the rest of the world combined on technology and technological innovation. But if we haven't got the people and the partnerships and the culture that's able to embrace that new technology and stop doing things the way we've always done them and innovate relentlessly, then actually all of that investment will be for nothing. And I think that air forces have got a really important leadership role to play in this in our respective armed forces, because we understand that technological leap, and it's in our DNA to be innovating at the edge of technology, and we've just got to make sure we've got the right culture for that, because ultimately, defending our sovereignty, our security, our prosperity collectively is what we're here for, and above all, patrolling and securing our skies and space. Thank you.
Well, gentlemen, if I have to sum up briefly what you have said, I will revert the order by quoting you, Air Chief Marshal, when you said that air and space power is something offered to political authorities to offer them the ability to act globally. And I think it's a very interesting sum up. And to do so, there is 3 keywords which were used by your colleagues. The first one is the need for cooperation, and Major General Edstrom emphasized that with the specific positioning of Sweden. So cooperation to lead to interoperability between Europeans, with NATO members, and with others. So it's a keyword. You need, of course, connectivity, and Lieutenant General Rosso, you have insisted on this keyword to say that it's a critical point, connectivity, how to interact and how to have the best connectivity. Mon General, you use the word enablers. We need enablers to do so. So we need cooperation, we need connectivity, we need enablers to have this ability to act globally and to offer air and space power to our respective political authorities. I will ask you a very simple question, because General Lavigne insisted, and it's the title of his final session, about our attempts to boost European defense. And it's the aim of these 2 days discussion, the aim of this final session. So could you be, each of you, very, very concrete to try to list next milestone? What would be the most feasible decision you can take as Air Chief of Staff to boost this European defense, let's say in the coming year? So, Mon General, would you like to start with this question? What could be a very practical decision just to be concrete and to boost European defense?
Bottom up. That means that for me, it's already what we are doing, but we have to do much more. We were talking about some cross-servicing exercise or agile combat employment, but I think that we already we have already done it here during the seminar with particular meetings, is that we have in different fields to create as an air chief, to maybe to ask to give some directives for our forces to do this bottom-up boost of Europe. It could be in the way of thinking about more, to get more agility, to put directives to get more agility with the procurement agency, with the industrials, with our team in order to make the air DevOps, for example, in the digital fields, for example. We can also implement more multi-domain ops in the air domain. Try to get exercise in these fields of air, cyber, and space. Put maybe some C2 in our exercises, because C2 we know that it's very important, but during our exercises we are not putting C2 drilling the exercise. Well, we have so many things to do. So for me, to boost this cooperation is to be more and more pragmatic and to come by the bottom.
Sir, what your concrete, one or two concrete proposal to boost European defense?
Yes, just a couple of two opportunities. In the short term, I think exercise and joint training, it's important, but we have to better finalize it. Having maybe common operational training infrastructures, optimizing more realistic and complex scenarios, which will be more, let's say, close to possible challenges in the future. I think we are already starting to do that, having exercises which are including command and control challenges, jamming, electronic warfare, cyber attacks. So I think we must be able to do that, having infrastructures throughout Europe and joining each nation capability to provide the best possible joint training for our forces. Within air forces first, but then also connecting with the land forces and the maritime forces, because that's the only way to have in the future real joint capabilities and multi-domain operations. And this is for the present and for a close future. If we have to look forward, I think it is our responsibility to try to look as close as possible to common future programs, to share capabilities, to share requirements, and try to have our countries, our industries, to build as close as possible future systems to be interoperable, to be able to share better capabilities, but even to offer maybe more shared export capabilities for our countries. It is not always just an operational perspective. I think industry, technology, know-how, and relation in an international arena are important part of the aerospace and defense industry as well. So short-term and mid and long-term priorities and challenges.
Thank you for this suggestion. Sir.
Thank you very much. I would say if you look at this in a 10-year perspective, to do it in the right order, everything. And I was explaining it like this. When I'm looking at the 10 years to come, we need to build a stronger air force within Sweden and also within the European. And then you have European countries. Then you have to do it in the right order to have the air power on there all the time. And the first step is to secure recruiting and training of personnel, because you need to build up the numbers of personnel and bring in new officers and new soldiers. When you've done that, you can go to the second step, and that's actually to focusing on, for us, is logistical gaps that we have to fill them, and also to see that we have a C2 system in place. After that, then you can bring in new capabilities and new platforms, but you can't do that before you have done these first two steps. And then the third and the last step will be to grow in organization, and it's And doing so in a 10-year span, you need also to have this the base ongoing, and that is to keep a high readiness on the air forces around Europe, to be ready when we are building our capabilities and are building up our organizations. Every day, every Monday morning we are waking up, we need to be ready to go from peacetime to wartime operations. So this is to build it step by step, and also to keep a focus on that we need to be able to do operations every day also on this 10-year road to that we are going on to.
Thank you.
I've had the longest time to think about it, so I felt for you there, Philip, answering that one. But if your question is, if I can have a magic answer, my magic answer would be next year I would ensure that we had common data protocols for every piece of equipment, platform, person in the battle space, so that we could share information. And the second thing I would do would be make sure that we could do the same in our synthetic training as well. Now, it won't happen next year, but maybe next year we could build the first foundation stone or the second foundation stone, and I know people are working on that. But as I say, that's my if I had a magic wand and had my wish. I think in practical terms, what we are looking to do and share it as much as we can is change the way that we go about our procurement and the way we introduce new equipment into service. Because I think one of the things that we are all suffering from is that we are living in a digital age, and we are still having industrial conversation or industrial age conversations with our suppliers, and we are behaving like that, and they are. And so I think there's a really important thing that we can do, and it shouldn't take, we can do it if we come to a common approach and change the way and change the relationship with our suppliers. And and I think there are very good examples out there already, but that I think is what would make the biggest change to our ability to face the threats of the future together.
Thank you. So to terminate this session, I have 4 questions. Some of them are very difficult, and one of them is very easy. So I will start with the easiest one to let you choose the one you want to pick up. The first question is, would it be possible to imagine an international military space cooperation? Certainly a question coming from China. So I don't know who would like to ask this easy question.
If I may, I think the first, so Michel spoke about it this morning. I think the first thing is that we need to establish through the United Nations and international standards for norms and rules of behavior that everybody can agree to. And then at that point, we've got a basis by which we can describe good behavior and bad behavior. And in answer to that question, that coalition that we've spoken about is already in place, and there are a number of like-minded nations who seek to act responsibly in space and seek to make sure that space is available for everybody, not just military utility, but in our private lives as well, and who come together. And I've actually got to go to a video conference this evening with Michel to talk about some of those aspects of space operations. So it's already in place, and I think it will only grow as more nations realize both the significance of space, but also the threats to our way of life if space is threatened.
Thank you. Second question, which is, in my view, not so difficult. The last 2 ones are more difficult. So, would the creation of a European Aerospace Military Agency be a first step to improve the efficiency of European airspace power? Who would like to jump in to deal with this question?
Well, I think it's the beginning is what Mike has already talked about, is the rules, we will have the international rule we will have in the space in order to keep the space, the use of the space, and so that's the first, and we are working on that. Of course, we have different mission in space. We have to detect, to identify, and to act for if we have to act to defend our assets. So of course, and there are so many different types of constellation or satellites of means in order to observe the Earth or to transmit via the space, or to exploit to use the electronic warfare domain from the space. So it's I think the cooperation is to be sure that there is a very good cooperation. It's the governance of such shared assets, and yes, of course, we need it. We've got some already, but we need it more in order to be more efficient and to be able to take into account all the needs of the nation who will be in this cooperation. So I think it's the good way to boost European defense.
Thank you, Mon Général. Last other question, more difficult. It's not only for Lieutenant General Rosso and Major General Ekstrom. You can be supported by your colleagues. Don't be afraid. So, yes, third question. As European air forces are born to fight on legacy platforms, Rafale, Typhoon, Gripen, for years to come before building new ones, that will be hopefully interoperable by design, what are the challenges ahead incorporating those platforms within a common operational environment? You have 2 minutes. But maybe you will be supported.
Thank you. No, but I mean, for me, as an air chief in Sweden, where we have what we call the 4th generation aircraft, and will not procure the 5th generation aircraft for years to come now. I think the most important thing is, actually, I don't really like the name of 4th and 5th generation, because it says implicate that you can never reach the 5th generation with the 4th generation. But some of the capabilities you have in the 4th generation can be upgraded. I mean, when it comes to sensors, when it comes to data links, and when it comes to weapons. So, saying that, one of the most important things I would say is to acknowledge that we will be operating the 4th generation aircraft for decades to come. That means that we need also to focus on upgrading the 4th generation aircrafts as close as possible to a 5th generation capability. Doing so also to be able to integrate them in tactical data links and to be able to fight together. So that's one important thing, which I think is very important. The other thing is, what I see was also, which has been starting already, is that we in the years to come are focusing on being able to train together. So we are not limiting our training and exercises to be only 5th generation or only 4th generation. It's very important that we take the steps to be able to integrate our fighters into big training exercises and trainings as soon as possible.
Thank you very much. Someone else? Yes.
Yeah, well, part of the answer is it's already there, and it is something that the Challenger Force, for example, is putting as an effort and as a priority, integrating 4th and 5th generation systems, connecting them. We found out, of course, that no doubt 5th generation air systems are capable of providing a huge amount of data, of support, of information to legacy system, both airborne or surface-based. But it is also true that legacy system, fourth-generation systems, can provide very good capability to fifth-generation aircraft, and providing some capabilities which sometimes a fifth-generation system is missing. So optimizing the integration of old and new systems, I think, is the key way to optimize resources, to put in the best practical use all the capabilities that each system is providing to the overall picture, to the overall air force or air system. We also have to start thinking about drones, RPVs, which are coming into the scenario, which are being used more and more, and we should be able to closely integrate them into not only into the air picture but into operations. And there are different philosophy for now. Separated and segregated airspace for drones and for manned aircraft, which probably is not the answer. But this is another challenge where, again, legacy aircraft, fourth-generation aircraft, could have huge benefits from sharing airspace, domains, and exercises with new systems. Command and control is another important key issue to provide unity of employment of new and old system. In theory, it is simple. In practical terms, it is not that easy. Exchanging and sharing data, it's a challenge. Different nations are utilizing different systems. It is a bottleneck because the capability of new sensors and new weapon system to provide huge flow of data are limited to what we have now. So those are all, let's say, challenges, but solving those, we are probably able to provide more capability for legacy and fourth-generation aircraft to be effective for the years to come.
Thank you very much. I will finish with a final question. As air chiefs, you are also strategic thinkers at the junction with the political authorities. And the final question is the following one. To what extent states' strategic priorities influence the goal of a military coalition? And I think that we are progressing in terms of European strategic culture. We try to boost European defense, as it was said many times. So how do you respond to this very challenging final question in a few words? And I think that for this final question, I think that everyone is expecting an answer coming from each of you. So would you like to start?
So I think it is it's both ways. Both, of course, we are influenced by what our political leadership and what our political decisions are made. But I think for all of us, we have a healthy conversation with our political leadership, and we can demonstrate the utility of what we do working together, whether it's armies, navies, or air forces, and the contribution we can make to sovereignty, prosperity, and security. And I think it speaks to the importance of a healthy dialogue at the strategic level across all of our countries.
Thank you, Major General.
Thank you. I would say the same also, that it's the dialogue with the political level is very important. And what I also have realized for Sweden and myself for the last couple of years is, being a non-NATO nation, we don't have the driver from being a NATO member. So I have realized that the importance of having political support in corporations. Without the support, even if you have a will from the political level, but without the really support there, it's difficult to reach the goals we want to reach in the time that are set. So I would say keeping a very good communication and dialogue, but also the importance of having this support from the political level.
Thank you. Sir.
Well, I think one of the indication of the link between armed forces and politicians, I think it's just the European Intervention Initiative. I call it a variable geometry connection, where we have different opportunities to share values and to cooperate, depending on what priorities single governments are giving to a specific scenario or a specific crisis or a specific geographical area. So we have several formats of possible cooperation, depending on how close political values, political ends in our single sovereign nations we are sharing. So I think as a principle, we will be more and more integrated if each of us is renouncing of a little bit of national sovereignty, unless we completely share all values. That's why we should have, and I think it's a good approach, it's a step-by-step approach of understanding each other, understanding that at political level we share values. And I think the armed forces have been demonstrating for tens of years that we really share values. It's easy for us to cooperate. So I think we are a practical living demonstration that we share a lot of values. So we are helping probably also our politicians to share more and more foreign policy or policies concerning specific challenges throughout the world. So this is, I think, a good way to promote an additional way of sharing values and making common decisions.
Thank you, Mon Général. So it's me who's got plenty of time to think about, but you have already said a lot of things. Of course, dialogue. We definitely built the future with the dialogue with our IS authorities. Dialogue of when we are talking about strategic vision, when we are addressing what will be the world in 2030, for example. And of course, it's the willing of our IS authority who's got the God's eye view on we need for this European cooperation, we need a common strategic view, and so we have to build it. And so here comes the European the E2I. Also, it's and Mike, you have already talked about that. Is the willing of our IS authority to put money in defense and security, and it's the case in different countries. In France, you know that with our military program act 1925. So it's a willing, and with the willing and the money, you are doing a lot of things. And the last thing is, Michel has already told about that this morning. The willing of our highest authority to boost space, the space strategy, defense strategy, and it was in the 17 during the strategic review, and then it comes now with the Air and Space Force. Thank you very much.
Merci. Thank you, Mon Général. So it's time to conclude very briefly, just to say that these 2 days were certainly a milestone with future milestones. We all hope, and we will all work on that in terms of European strategic culture, in terms of boosting European defense. I think it was very substantive. Thank you, all of you, for your response, for your very substantive presentation. It's time for me to thank 4 of you, so thank you very much, Major General Edstrom, Air Chief Marshal Winston, Lieutenant General Rousseau, and General Lavigne. And it's time, I think, for all of us to applaud you and to wish you the best for the coming years.
We are now reaching the last address of this conference from Florence Parly, French Minister for the Armed Forces, somehow highlighting the healthy dialogue existing between military and civil politics in each of our country. Minister Parly is a graduate from Sciences Po Paris and the French National School of Administration. She started her career in the government, initially as a junior advisor, then climbing up and rising to the position of Budget Affairs Advisor in Prime Minister Jospin's office, before being appointed Secretary of State for Budget from 2000 to 2002. Minister Parly also occupied key positions in French companies and corporations such as Air France and most recently SNCF, of which she became Director General in 2016. She is French Minister for the Armed Forces since 2015, and since she hasn't been able to make it physically here to Le Bourget, she sent us a video.
Dear all, I'm thrilled to conclude this very first edition of the EI2 Air and Space Power Conference. I'm grateful to the French Air and Space Force for having successfully led such a timely initiative, which clearly deserves to occur every year in order to embrace the entire contribution of air power to the European security. Hosting this event in the French Air and Space Museum was a symbol in itself, as this place embodies the pioneering character of the air and space epopees, mirroring the pioneering character of EI2 itself, and the international dimension of the air and space domains, which can be considered as a driving force in the development of European military cooperation. I would also like to warmly thank our European partners for their commitment to this endeavor and their contribution to the shaping of a European strategic culture in the air and space domains. On the issue of synchronizing strategic and operational tempos, you touched on a crucial point. Strategy is about more than just catching the enemy off guard. We nowadays have to learn to fight fast and slow, because at the strategic level, information warfare and ambiguity strategies require us to slow the pace of operations to avoid the trap of escalation. At the political level, the different national tempos, which result from unique national processes, require mutual awareness and a high degree of synchronization, especially between allies and partners. Now, I wish to share a few thoughts with you about the importance of the air and space domains for European security and defense. And let's start with the facts. We are collectively facing dangerous changes in our strategic environment. The air domain is not immune from this worrying trend, as we recently saw with the violent hijacking of a Ryanair flight to Belarus. In such a context, Europe must assume its responsibility and play an active role in contributing to the stability of its security environment. One of our challenges for the near future is to preserve our access to this particularly strategic domain. On the one hand, by strengthening the European defense industrial and technological base. On the other hand, I'm fully convinced that our air forces have to scale up to meet the strategic challenges. Air power is a critical asset against hybrid strategies because of its range, speed, and ubiquity. Air power can be used as an effective tool of strategic signaling to demonstrate our political will while managing escalation. I do not forget the space domain, which is now part of NATO operational areas. Indeed, the space domain is now recognized as a domain of strategic rivalry because some states behave dangerously. In that context, the EU has competitive arguments that must be preserved, in particular, Earth observation, satellite communications, and space connectivity. France built up a space strategy and will host the future NATO Space Center of Excellence in Toulouse. As France is preparing for the presidency of the EU Council during the first semester of 2022, be assured that access to the strategic commons, especially air and space, will be on the agenda. Thank you all for your participation at this successful conference. You proved it today. It only takes a lot of willpower to make an organization of 13 countries work. And this is up to you to grab the full opportunity offered by this selective Air Forces club of able and willing European nations. EI2 is indeed an opportunity to learn from each other's experiences and perspectives in order to facilitate future military engagement and protect European security interest. Thank you.
Dear distinguished guests, I do have only 2 minutes remaining, so I'll be short and as efficient as possible. This has been a very rich 2-day event with 6 first-class keynote speakers addressing us, plus 8 roundtables that were fascinating and enabling us valuable and fruitful exchanges on air and space power. I have absolutely no doubt this symposium will usefully contribute to pave the way for how best we can all cooperate to make air and space power always more relevant for the years to come, despite the many challenges awaiting us. After wishing you a safe trip back home, please allow me to highlight those who have played a pivotal role in the success of this 2-day event. Not a small feat, taking into account the nightmarish sanitary constraints that were due to COVID. So first, Colonel Richard Gros. You've been animating this event with maestria and having agility, ubiquity, precision, and focused effect, you epitomize the air and space power. So maybe a round of applause for him. Merci, Richard. Richard, you were not alone. I would like just to cite Joannick, Raphaël, Malcolm, Léna, Chloé, Pauline, Nathalie, Mélina, Marine, Benjamin, Marie, Louise, Loris, Anne, Laurent, Lucas, De Pierre, De Mathieu, Claude, Coralie, Vincent, Florian, Blanche, Manon, Camille, Aurélien, Julie, and Ashley. That's not the whole Air Force, but it was really useful. Merci beaucoup. I'd like also to thank the MN from Creil Air Base, whose support was very important. Thanks for the financial support of GIFAS, Airbus, Dassault, MBDA, Thales, Ariane Group, Safran, DGRS, and last but not least, I would like to warmly thank Mrs. Robert Augustelaine in opening this unique museum for this one-of-a-kind event. And I would like to, as a token of appreciation and to close my speech right on time, I would like to offer this bouquet of flowers. Air Power can also deliver some flowers. So thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. Au revoir.